Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel Steelheart. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. When Alice returned home from her morning workout, she walked into the kitchen with an easy smile, her cheeks flushed from exercise. Eddie was already there, sipping his coffee at the counter, the laptop folded beside him. She paused, watching him for a moment, before she decided it was now or never. "Honey," Alice began with a brightness that felt slightly forced. "I have some news. I'm taking a little vacation next week, going to Hawaii for 5 days." Eddie blinked, setting his coffee cup down a bit harder than intended. He looked up at her, his expression controlled but surprised. "Are you serious?" he asked, though his voice was steady. Alice's smile wavered. "Yes, a friend from school moved there recently, Camilla. Remember her? She invited me. I think I could use some time to recharge." Eddie leaned back, assessing her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Why didn't you tell me you were planning a trip? And why can't we go together?" Alice's face softened as she took a seat across from him. "Oh, Eddie, you know how it is. I just need a little break. A breath of fresh air, a chance to unwind. Just a few days to, reset." Eddie stared at her for a long moment, his brows furrowed, but he only nodded, as if he was still piecing together what she'd said. He sighed before responding, "I understand meeting time, Alice. But while cleaning up, I found 2 tickets. One with Nick's name on it. Is there something I'm missing?" Alice's smile turned stiff, her laugh unnaturally high-pitched. "Oh, Eddie, it's nothing. Nick, my trainer, he's also going to Hawaii. We happened to be talking about it, and he mentioned he was already planning to go, so I got us both a discount on the tickets." She chuckled, but Eddie's gaze remained sharp, unreadable. "Just to save money?" Eddie asked, his voice measured. Alice leaned forward, holding his gaze with sincerity. "Yes, absolutely. Nick's just helping with the fitness events there. There's a whole crowd going to Hawaii for these master classes and fitness programs. It's a good chance to stay active and relax at the same time." Eddie exhaled slowly. His eyes searched her face as if looking for something beyond the words. But Eddie knew that there was more Alice wasn't saying. Eddie's gaze settled on Alice, calm but with a heaviness in his eyes. "Alice, are you faithful to me?" His voice was low, steady, but every word was edged with something unyielding. Alice's cheeks flushed, and she forced a chuckle, as if to brush away his question. "Eddie, what are you saying?" She tried to hold his gaze, but faltered, looking away. "Of course I am. Honey, this trip, it just came together quickly, that's all. I didn't want to upset you by making a big deal out of it." Eddie's expression didn't change. "Then why didn't you tell me before you bought the tickets?" Alice fumbled with her response, her voice softening as she reached across the table. "Because, Eddie, even if I had invited you, you couldn't go. You don't have vacation time for months, right? I didn't see a reason to bother you about it." She tried to meet his gaze with an easy smile, but his eyes held steady, unamused. Eddie's jaw tightened. "Alice, you didn't even try to discuss it with me. And now I find out that you're going with Nick." He shook his head slightly. Any husband would be upset to hear that. Alice straightened in her seat, throwing her hands up lightly in exasperation. "Honey, please. Nick isn't a lover, he's my trainer. It's just a coincidence he's going. And it's not like I'm spending the whole trip with him. I'm going to see Camilla. She and I will be lying out on the beach, swimming in the ocean, catching up on all the silly things we haven't talked about in ages. It's just a girl's trip, really." Eddie let out a long breath, nodding slightly. "All right, Alice. It's your decision. You've made it. Do what you want." His voice was quiet, and Alice felt a strange pang as she looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. "Darling," she asked, hesitantly, "you're not offended, are you?" Eddie's face remained impassive, and his tone turned clipped. "Men don't get offended." He paused, looking at her one last time before standing up and heading toward the door. "I've got to get to the auto repair shop," he said, slipping on his jacket. "Brake pads need changing." And with that, Eddie was out the door, his footsteps fading down the hall. He got into his car, his mind racing as he drove away. After his stop at the auto repair shop, Eddie parked a few blocks away at a small cafe where his old friend Justin was waiting. Justin had been working as a private investigator for about 2 years. Justin had a slight grin on his face as he waved Eddie over. "Eddie, been a while. How's life treating you?" Eddie didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Justin, I'm hoping you can tell me what you found out about Alice and her trainer." Justin's smile faded as he exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Listen, Eddie, it's only been 2 weeks since you asked me to look into this. I've gathered some info, but it might not be enough for you yet." Eddie's expression hardened as he listened, but Justin continued. "This guy Nick, he's a fitness trainer, decent enough at what he does. There was a scandal with one client, though. Got hushed up, so his reputation didn't take a hit, but it made waves for a while." "Go on," Eddie urged, his voice low. "I followed them both. They only seemed to meet at the gym, but I managed to get a couple of photos of them saying goodbye after workouts. Take a look here." Justin pulled a few photos from a folder and handed them across the table. Eddie stared at the images. Nick was leaning in close to Alice, his hand resting on her shoulder. Then it drifted downward, just grazing her lower back. She leaned in, smiling, and he kissed her on the cheek, just a little too close to her mouth. "Look at his hand," Justin pointed out. "Seems friendly, sure, but that hand placement, it's suggestive." Eddie's jaw clenched as he examined each photo. Something inside him twisted uncomfortably. He looked up at Justin, his voice steady. "What else?" Justin nodded. "I spent time watching them in the gym too. From what I could tell, Nick was professional, at least on the surface. But there were these touches. Subtle, but intimate. And Alice, she seemed to like it. She'd laugh, smile, always looking like she was enjoying herself." Eddie's face grew darker, but he kept his composure. "Well, Justin, here's the next piece of the puzzle. Alice is going to Hawaii in 2 days. She claims it's to visit her friend Camilla. But she bought 2 tickets, one of which has Nick's name on it. She's concocted some story about a fitness event and a discount. But I don't buy it." Justin raised his eyebrows. "You've got every reason to be suspicious, man." "And then some." Eddie leaned in, his voice hushed but intense. "She also withdrew $15,000 from our joint account. In cash." Justin's eyes widened. $15,000? And cash, huh? That's not a beach trip budget. This gets more interesting by the minute. Hawaii could be the perfect place to catch them slipping, Eddie. I'll get everything on camera if they're up to anything." Eddie nodded grimly. "Good. I need hard evidence, Justin. It's the only way to make her see what she's done. I want her to understand that lying, cheating, none of that is without consequences." Justin's face was somber, but a hint of a grin appeared as Eddie added, "And here's a little extra. You'll get a kick out of this. I swapped out her cash with counterfeits." Justin let out a surprised laugh. "Why'd you do that?" "Just a lesson," Eddie said, his lips curling into a slight smile. "She'll still use card for the hotel and expenses, but she'll be counting on that cash for whatever else she has planned." A little surprised to remind her that betrayal has its cost. Justin chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, Eddie, you've got yourself a partner on this. I'll make sure she remembers this trip to Hawaii for a long time. Before you find out what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel." A few days later, Alice stood at the front door, a bright smile on her face as she leaned in to kiss Eddie goodbye. "See you soon, darling," she whispered, squeezing his hand. Eddie smiled, warm and doting, playing the role of the loving husband perfectly. "Have an amazing time, sweetheart," he said, watching her as she headed toward the car, bags in hand. As soon as Alice pulled out of the driveway, Eddie's expression darkened. He'd played his part. Now it was time to act. Eddie wasted no time in contacting his lawyer, Mr. Daniels, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for his precise approach in high-stakes divorces. When Eddie walked into office, he wasted no time getting to the point, explaining everything about Alice's behavior, the recent money withdrawal, and her trip with Nick. "Soon, I'll have more than enough evidence of her betrayal," Eddie said firmly. "But it's not just about the divorce. I want consequences for Nick too. He's not getting away from this with a clean slate. I want his reputation destroyed. Mr. Daniels nodded, his fingers steepled as he listened carefully. Eddie, this is thorough preparation. I don't see this going any other way but in your favor. We'll make sure the entire process is as smooth as possible for you and rough for them. Satisfied, Eddie left office with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few days, he kept in touch with Justin, who was following Alice's activities in Hawaii. At first, everything seemed as Alice had described. She met up with Camilla, and the two spent a fair bit of time together. Alice was attending fitness events, and Nick seemed to keep a polite distance, though it was clear they shared more than just a casual friendship. She acts like she's just with her friend most of the time, Justin reported over the phone. But trust me, there's something more to it. You can tell she's trying to keep things professional with Nick in public. Nick is popular with girls and women. I don't think Alice is sure she can own it. That's probably why there's a distance between them for now. Eddie grunted. Of course. She's treating me like I'm her fallback plan. She's playing both sides. On the fourth day, Justin's update took a more damning turn. Got some photos and videos you're going to want to see, Justin said. Alice and Nick were all over each other in the pool this afternoon. Hugs, kisses, the whole thing. And then, Nick headed to her room after dinner. He stayed there all night. Eddie's stomach twisted as he imagined the scene, a dull ache of betrayal settling in, even though he'd prepared himself for it. He thanked Justin, instructing him to keep the surveillance going for the remainder of the trip. He wanted every detail, every piece of proof. In the meantime, Eddie began carefully packing things, box by box. Finally, Eddie logged into their joint account and withdrew the remaining balance. He planned every detail, prepared every piece of the puzzle. The next day, Eddie's phone rang. It was Alice, her voice sounding unusually somber. Honey, I have some bad news, she began, her voice soft and dramatic. Camilla, she had an accident. She slipped by the pool and hurt her ankle pretty badly. I can't leave her like this, so I'll be staying a couple of extra days to help her out. Eddie gritted his teeth, forcing warmth into his tone as he played along. Of course, Alice. I understand. You'd never abandon Camilla in a situation like that. Take all the time you need. Alice sighed, a hint of relief in her voice. Thank you, Eddie. I knew you'd understand. You're the best. After hanging up, Eddie sat in silence for a moment, a wry smile on his face. He knew Alice was lying. That Camilla injury story might have worked on someone else, but not him. Just as he was thinking this over, his phone buzzed again. It was Justin. Eddie, Justin said without preamble. She spent the morning with Nick, planning something for the next few days. I heard them talking about renting a small yacht and having a few days of uninterrupted fun. Eddie replied, and Alice told me that her friend Camilla hurt her ankle. Justin was quick to respond. Alice has been spending the last few days with Nick, and Camille hasn't been around. Eddie felt a bitter laugh bubble up, but held it back. Thanks, Justin. That's all I needed to know. I think you can call it a wrap. I've made my decision, and Justin, you can go back. Justin sounded relieved. All right, man. Eddie ended the call and quickly dialed his lawyer, Mr. Daniels. He filled him in on the latest updates and handed over all the materials Justin had gathered, the photos, the videos, and even the recordings of Alice's plans with Nick. Mr. Daniels reviewed the evidence and gave Eddie a nod of approval. These are rock solid, Eddie. The divorce papers will be ready by tomorrow, and we'll be able to start proceedings against Nick as well. I'll handle his professional misconduct complaints. By the time we're through, I doubt he'll keep many clients. Eddie felt a surge of satisfaction as he thanked his lawyer. But the day still had one last surprise in store. That evening, his phone rang once more. Justin's number flashed on the screen, and Eddie answered, curious. Eddie, you'll love this. I was just about to wrap up when I saw Alice and Nick heading into one of those high-end boutiques. She wanted to buy him something expensive. And here's the best part. She tried to pay with that cash you swapped, and the staff caught on to the counterfeits immediately. Eddie could barely hold back a laugh. You're kidding. Nope. It turned into a whole scene. They brought in the manager, then the cops got involved. She was absolutely humiliated. Nick got nervous when the police showed up. Eddie chuckled, a feeling of vindication warming him. That's what they get. Let them squirm for a change. And as he hung up, Eddie couldn't shake the sense of justice settling over him. Everything was falling into place, just as he'd hoped. Alice returned home a few days later, the frustration and tension from her vacation plastered on her face. What was supposed to be a few carefree days with Nick had turned into an absolute mess. The scandal over the counterfeit bills still burned in her mind, and she was already strategizing how to address it with the bank. Her trip to Hawaii had been expensive, and now she had no idea where to replace the missing money. But right now, all Alice wanted was to drop her bags at home, change, and get to the bank to straighten things out. She opened the door, expecting the usual warmth of their house, but something was wrong. The house felt empty, too empty. She paused, frowning as she scanned the living room, noting the absence of Eddie's usual clutter. A quick search confirmed her worst fear. His things were missing. His clothes, his books, even his toothbrush in the bathroom, all gone. Panicked, Alice pulled out her phone and dialed Eddie's number. He answered after a few rings, his voice calm, almost cold. "Honey," she began, forcing her voice to steady. "What's going on?" "Where are you?" Eddie's reply was steady, unhurried. "Alice, I have 2 pieces of news for you. News item number 1. In about an hour, a courier will be there with your divorce papers. And news item number 2. In 2 hours, a realtor will arrive because I've put the house up for sale. So please, Alice, be a good girl and be ready." His words hit her like a slap. She stammered, her mind racing. "Eddie, what the hell are you doing?" But his tone didn't change. "Alice, I know all about your vacation with Nick. And now it's time you face the consequences of your actions." Alice's anger flared, her voice shaking. "What were you doing? Following me? Spying on me?" "I trusted you, Alice." "For too long, in fact," Eddie replied, his voice unwavering. "And when my trust ran out, I decided to test it. Let's just say the result was disappointing." She opened her mouth to respond, but the line went dead. Her attempts to call him back went straight to voicemail. Heart pounding, Alice stared at her phone, feeling the ground slip away beneath her. Her breath quickened, and before she could stop herself, tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks. Eddie's calm, distant words echoed in her mind, and the dreadful realization washed over her. Everything was crumbling. Her vacation, her secrets, her life, it was all unraveling faster than she could grasp. Soon divorce proceedings began in court. The courtroom proceedings were grueling for Alice. She sat across from Eddie, her once confident demeanor unraveling as evidence after evidence was laid bare. Eddie had spared no detail, and as she watched photos, videos, and even recordings reveal her betrayal, Alice felt a deep shame settling in. She'd always prided herself on her cleverness, her ability to keep things discreet. But here, she was utterly exposed, her schemes stripped bare in front of strangers, her own husband, and herself. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Eddie's lawyer, Mr. Daniels, expertly presented each piece of evidence, weaving a clear narrative of deceit and disrespect. She saw her interactions with Nick, the touches, the lingering glances, the kisses, all flashing on a screen that felt as harsh as a spotlight. And as the final pages of their marriage were laid open for the court, Alice realized she had lost. She hadn't just lost Eddie, she'd lost any semblance of respect others might have once held for her. After the initial shock wore off, Alice's mind began spinning around another problem, the counterfeit cash. The $15,000 in fake bills had left her with a tangle of unresolved issues. She wondered, uneasily, if Nick might have been the one who set her up, though she had no proof. But whatever the truth, Nick had severed all contact, blocking her calls and disappearing without a word. The last she'd heard, his reputation had taken a severe hit. He'd been forced to resign from the fitness club, facing accusations of exploiting his position with clients. Eddie and his lawyer hadn't stopped at the gym. They had filed complaints with every sports association they could reach, painting Nick as a predator using his profession for personal gain. Nick couldn't find any place willing to hire him, so he'd left, returning to Eastern Europe in shame, with no choice but to start fresh far from where he'd once thrived. When the judge finally ruled in Eddie's favor, awarding him most of their shared assets, Alice sat still, her mind numb. Their home was already listed, and her share, split down to a fraction, left her feeling defeated. Eddie's victory was as complete as it was painful. He had taken everything she valued, her security, her reputation, her lover. Eddie felt a bittersweet satisfaction as he left the courtroom, finally free from the betrayal that had shadowed him. He'd won a large portion of their shared savings and his self-respect, but there was an emptiness in his chest that no court victory could fill. The woman he had once loved was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized, and the memories of that love were hard to erase. In the year that followed, Eddie tried to move on, but the echoes of their past lingered, haunting him in quiet moments and forcing him to face the undeniable truth. He had loved her deeply, and a part of him had hoped they would be able to grow old together. Now he was left to rebuild. The victory felt hollow, the property and money a cold reminder of what he'd lost. The betrayal had left a wound that only time could heal, and Eddie knew it would take a long time to find peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. Your thoughts mean a lot, so drop your reactions in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Wishing you all a fantastic day and the best of luck.